In this section, we will talk about experimental design. Let's talk about some definitions. An observational study observes and measures a variable or variables of interest and records the data without any interference from the researchers who conduct the study. So the key phrase here is without any interference. An observational study simply observes without having any kind of interference. A survey is a type of observational study where a researcher asks subjects directly when they want subjects to report a variable. A lot of times these are opinions. An experiment involves at least two variables. The researcher applies some treatment and then proceeds to observe its effect on the subjects. The subjects are called experimental units. The researcher takes control of the explanatory variable because they want to see how the changes in the value of the explanatory variable affects the response variable. Okay, these two terms are important. So let's look at them more closely. An explanatory variable is a variable that the researchers are changing. Once again, the researcher takes control of the explanatory variable. So they change this variable, they change something. And once that something is changed, what is the response? What is the effect of that? So the response variable is a variable that's being studied. The response variable is the variable we're going to observe to determine if it is affected. There are two types of observational studies. One is a retrospective study. Observational studies are retrospective when they use historical data that's not recorded by the researcher. For example, a researcher identifies a group of successful entrepreneurs and goes back to look at their high school and college grades. These are historical records and not recorded by the researcher as part of the experiment. A prospective study, these are observational studies in which data is recorded in real time. So the researcher is actually recording the data. As an example, a researcher identifies a group of 6-year-olds in foster care, and each year the researcher meets with the children to assess their ability to adjust in the academic environment. In this study, the researcher himself or herself is recording the data. That's why this is a prospective study. Here's an example. A researcher wants to determine if there is a relationship between study habits and performance on the first test. Identify each of the following designs as being an observational or experimental study. If the study is an observational study, state whether it's retrospective or prospective. If the study is an experiment, identify the explanatory and response variables. So let's take a look at the first one. After passing back the test, the researcher asked students how long they spent studying for the exam and what letter grade have they earned. So let's ask ourselves, is the researcher interfering in the study in any way? Not at all. The researcher is simply asking students how long they spent studying. Because the researcher is not interfering with the study and simply observing, this is an example of an observational study. Now, the second part says, if the study is an observational study, state whether it's retrospective or prospective. Well, is the researcher basing the study on historical records, or is the researcher documenting this in real time? The researcher is asking students how long they studied, so this is happening now. Therefore, since the data is being recorded in real time, this is a prospective study. And once again, this is because the data is being recorded in real time. Okay, here's another one. A researcher asks a professor for access to their gradebook data so the researcher can look at the amount of time students spent working on online homework. These results were compared to the exam score. Once again, let's ask ourselves, is the researcher observing or is the researcher interfering? Since the researcher is simply asking the professor for the access to the gradebook and not designing any kind of experiment, this is going to be an observational study. Now, is the researcher recording the data in real time? No, because the researcher has asked the professor for access to their gradebook data, which is historical data. Therefore, this is a retrospective study. Part C, The researcher asked the professor to give some classes a study guide and some classes no study guide. The researcher then compares test scores of the class that received the study guide and the class that did not. Now, in this case, the researcher is interfering. How is the researcher interfering? Some classes are getting a study guide and some classes are not. Because there is interference happening, this is an experimental study. Okay, for an experimental study, we want to identify the explanatory variable and the response variable. So let's do both. Now, remember, we learned that an explanatory variable is a variable that we are changing. So let's take a look at our example. What are we changing? Well, some classes are getting a study guide and some classes are not. So the explanatory variable is the study guide. The response variable is a variable that we're observing to determine if it is affected. So what are we looking at to see if it's affected? Well, we're looking at the test scores of the class that received the study guide and the class that did not. So the response variable is test scores. So remember, for an explanatory variable, look at which variable are we changing, and the response variable is which variable are we studying. Part D, researcher asks students to keep a journal recording how they're studying and the amount of time they're studying. The researcher collects a journal when they complete the test. Okay, now this is an observational study because the researcher is not interfering. The researcher is simply asking students to keep a journal. So therefore, this is going to be an example of an observational study. And since students are recording the data in real time, this is a prospective study. In the next examples, please do these on your own. For each of these, state whether this is an observational study or an experiment. If the study is an observational study, then state whether it's retrospective or prospective. If the study is an experiment, identify the explanatory and response variables. And we will go over these in class.